everybody, thanks for watching. This is the second video I'm doing. I want to thank everybody who actually took the time to watch the long first video, and I hope now that you realize the truth about religion in the Bible and that your third eye is now open. And the third eye isn't evil. When you see people, cover the one eye, it just means that they know, that they understand what's going on. They got the information. They know their third eye is open. But your third eye really is your pineal and pituitary gland. It's that pineal gland that, for black people, when the sun hits it, we are children of the sun. So when the sun hits that pineal gland, when it hits our head, it gives us more knowledge. The melanin in us activates because of the sun. We're children of the sun. It's what white people don't have, and one of the reasons why they hate us so much. But that's a whole nother discussion. Now, in this video, I want to talk about money. I want to talk about the money system in America and how everybody there is getting scammed out of every dollar that they've ever made. I also want to talk about how this affects the black community, and I really want to talk about the real reason why slaves were set free. One more thing I want to get into is, what does it mean to be a U.S. citizen, especially if you're a black person? Definitely want to get into that as well. Now, what is money? Now, money is basically worthless, really. The paper money that we have in America is worthless. But if you can get people to accept pieces of paper for money, then money is worth whatever we all agree that it is worth. Now, we all know that money used to be in coin form a long time ago. Now, a lot of people don't know how that came to be and what was the whole process with that. Now, before, we had gold banks, because everything was done in coins, gold and silver. Now, if you was rich and you had a whole lot of gold, it was very dangerous way back then to keep so much gold or silver in your property, because you can get robbed, and that's what happened to a lot of people. So gold banks came about, and what they did was they stored the rich people's and basically anybody's gold and silver, for a price. So they kept that gold and silver safe. And what the goldsmith used to do is, when a person came to deposit gold, he would give them like a receipt for different denominations of gold, or for the entire amount of gold that they had in his safes. Now, what people used to do is they used to take those receipts that they got for their gold that they deposit and go into town and buy things with the receipts, pay for goods and services with the receipts for gold. And those people would do the same thing, because it was just easier for you to carry around a paper receipt that was just as good as gold than carry around heavy actual gold and silver in your pockets. So this is basically how paper money came to be. People would basically transfer the receipts as gold, but at any time they can go into a goldsmith or gold bank and deposit the slip and get their gold out. Now, what happened was the goldsmith realized that people were actually dishonest, and they wasn't coming in to pick up their gold. Now, that one time was everybody who had gold in his bank coming to pick up their gold. So he had a lot of gold on hand. Now, what the goldsmith did was he decided to loan other people's gold out at interest. And instead of giving them actual gold, what he would do was give them the paper receipts for gold. So that way he would have that actual gold on hand and not have to actually give out any gold. And because the people was using the paper receipts for money, that receipt was just as good as money. So the money and profit he made off of that, he used that money to buy more gold and repeat the process. Now, the goldsmith only needed to have a fraction of the gold on hand that he loaned out. So he would still have the people gold that stored their gold in his gold bank, but when he bought more gold, he only really needed to buy a fraction of the gold that he loaned out, because people wasn't coming in to claim the gold at one time. Only once in a while somebody came in. Now, this process is called fractional reserve banking, and it's still in place today in America. Our banks still use the process of fractional reserve banking. And when you think about it, it's fraud, because they're basically taking your savings and loaning it to other people and making a profit off of it, and they're charging you for keeping your money in their bank. Now, when they make a loan to a person and that person pays interest, that's a profit for them, and they can take that interest money and make more money off of it. I mean, the process just repeats itself. Now, how is this possible? Now, to figure out how this really worked, we got to go back to Benjamin Franklin. Now we all know that the colonials and Benjamin Franklin was under the rule of King George III. They still had to do what the king told them to do. Now King George and most of the people over in Europe was using a fractional reserve banking system, and their money was actually backed by gold and silver. But the colonists was using colonial script. It wasn't backed by anything. It was just paper money. But it worked. It worked in America. Everybody flourished. Everybody did well with just this paper system. Now, in 1757, King George sent for Benjamin Franklin and asked him what were they using for money. And this is what he said.
That is simple. In the colonies, we issue our own money. It is called colonial scrip. We issue it in proper proportion to the demands of trade and industry to make the products pass easily from the producers to the consumers. In this manner, creating for ourselves our own paper money, we control its purchasing power, and we have no interest to pay to no one.
Now, this was dangerous for King George III because King George III and the people that were surrounding him, they had a monopoly on gold and silver. They were the main issuer. People were buying all their gold and silver from them. Now, if people figured out that their country could actually do very well with just paper, then King George would lose his power. He would lose his hold on the other colonies, on the other countries. So what he did was he made Benjamin Franklin and the colonists pay their taxes in gold and silver. And the whole reason why they was using paper instead of gold and silver was because they didn't really have any gold and silver then. I mean, it was real scarce because the king was hoarding it all and he was making it real hard for people to get so he could drop the prices up. But this was dangerous because they basically figured out the secret to making your society run. The secret is basically that whatever the people agree is money, it's going to be money. It's going to be worth something. Now, since the colonies didn't have the gold and silver they needed to pay the taxes, it was very hard for them to pay their taxes. I mean, things got bad and, merchants had to change their methods of payment and people really couldn't afford the products. So what happened was they was like, you know what, we can't do this shit. So we're going to have to go to war. Now, this was the main cause for the Revolutionary War. As a matter of fact, Benjamin Franklin wrote in his autobiography that this was the reason for the Revolutionary War.
The colonies would gladly have borne a little tax on tea and other matters had it not been that England took away from the colonies their money, which created unemployment and dissatisfaction. The inability of the colonists to get the power to issue their own money permanently out of the hands of George III and the international bankers was the prime reason for the Revolutionary War.
And of course, after the war, America won its independence from King George III. But what this really did was really piss the British off. But not just the British, the people who were behind the British, the people who was behind the throne, the secret societies. Now, the main thing they wanted to do was get back control of America. And it was another reason why they wanted to do that, and I'll explain later. But this began the long struggle for Europe to install in America a private central bank. Now, this is what a central bank does.
A central bank is an institution that produces the currency of an entire nation. Based on historical precedent, two specific powers are inherent in central banking practice: the control of interest rates and the control of the money supply, or inflation. The central bank does not simply supply a government's economy with money, it loans it to them at interest. Then, through the use of increasing and decreasing the supply of money, the central bank regulates the value of the currency being issued. It is critical to understand that the entire structure of this system can only produce one thing in the long run: debt. It doesn't take a lot of ingenuity to figure this scam out. For every single dollar produced by the central bank is loaned at interest. That means every single dollar produced is actually the dollar plus a certain percent of debt based on that dollar. And since the central bank has the monopoly over the production of the currency for the entire country, and they loan each dollar out with immediate debt attached to it, where does the money to pay for the debt come from? It can only come from the central bank again, which means the central bank has to perpetually increase its money supply to temporarily cover the outstanding debt created, which in turn, since that new money is loaned out at interest as well, creates even more debt. The end result of this system without fail is slavery, for it is impossible for the government and thus the public to ever come out of the self-generating debt. The founding fathers of this country were well aware of this.
Now, what they don't teach you in school, what they don't talk about is just about every president we had before Woodrow Wilson had to deal with these international bankers trying to come in and set up a private central bank. Now, and they succeeded a few times. We're gonna talk about that. But what most people don't understand is when Lincoln became president, a lot of people think that he wanted to free the slaves because slavery was wrong. But that wasn't the case. A lot of it had to do with private central banks. Now, this is the Lincoln quotes. This is what he said about slavery.
I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it now exists. I believe I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so. My paramount objective is to save the Union, and it is not either to save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it.
Now, the real reason why Lincoln wanted to free the slaves was because the South was bought and paid for with slaves. And slave labor basically made the South flourish, and it was doing well. And the North borrowed a lot of money to establish the colonies. And the bankers was putting a squeeze on Lincoln. So Lincoln wanted the South to pay more in taxes. And the South was like, no, we're not trying to do that. We're not trying to pay any more money. As a matter of fact, since y'all in trouble, we want to succeed from this union. We want to basically separate from the North. Now, Lincoln couldn't just go down there and say, hey, we're going to attack y'all because of money problems. We want y'all money. He had to come up with a reason to get the people and to get the Senate to accept the approval of a union, an army, to go down there and fight against the Confederates. Now, people was against slavery back then. They was really against slavery for a while at that time, believe it or not. Now, private central bank was already set up before this time, but we're gonna get into that. So Lincoln pushed Congress to approve the Civil War, and of course they did so, and the Civil War happened, not because of slavery, but because of money. Now, in 1781, Alexander Hamilton and Robert Morris got the Senate to approve the first privately owned central bank called the Bank of North America. Now, you already seen what private central banks do. It's not good for the people. So it caused the dollar to basically plummet. The value of the dollar went down. The value of the money went down. So these private central banks got charters, either 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, like that. So when a charter was up for the bank, the Senate didn't renew it because it wasn't good for the people. So it was cut off. Now, Alexander Hamilton and Robert Morris didn't give up there. They kept going after re-establishing a private central bank. Now, Robert Morris and Alexander Hamilton was being paid off by the international bankers. They wasn't Americans, international bankers. They were being bought. So about 6 years later, they reestablished a private central bank called the First Bank of the United States in Philadelphia. As a matter of fact, that building is still there today. It's still there. Now, Thomas Jefferson at this time was really against private central banks because, of course, he knew they was bad for the people. But most of the Senate and mostly everybody in the government at the time was being bought and paid for. They were being paid off by these international bankers. This is what Thomas Jefferson had to say about central banks.
If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and the corporations which grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered.
Now, the people who was behind this whole international banking scam was the Rothschilds, the whole Rothschild banking dynasty, and the people like the Wahlbergs and all these people that was associated with the Rothschilds. Now, we all know the Rothschilds today are the richest, powerfulest family on the planet, period. Because while these other bankers back then was loaning out money to regular people, the Rothschilds was loaning money to governments and kings. So they made a lot of money. As a matter of fact, Amschel Mayer Rothschild basically boasted, he basically is quoted as saying that, "Give me control of a nation's money supply, and I care not who make its laws." Now, at this time, James Madison was the president, And when the charter came up to be renewed for the First Bank of the United States, it didn't get renewed. Now, Rothschild threatened that if they did not renew the bank's charter, that America would find itself in another war. And when it came time for the charter to get renewed, of course it didn't, and England attacked America and the War of 1812 began. Now, England was already at war with Napoleon, so they really could not commit a lot of troops to the battle with us. So the War of 1812 ended in a draw 2 years later. Now, the Rothschilds was a powerful family. It only took them 2 years to reestablish another private central bank. Now, in 1816, the Second Bank of the United States was established. Now, let me explain to you how this whole thing works. Now, let's say it costs $10 million to establish a private central bank. The American government had to put up 20% up front, so that's $2 million. Now, what they did was take that $2 million and loan it to other bankers, and they would use that money as collateral to get more money, and then use that money to make up the other 80% to buy up the rest of the bank. So you basically had a bunch of international bankers who own 80% of an American bank, while the citizens itself only own 20%. Now, this is basically a big scam because they really paid no money at all for the other 80%. They used the Americans' money, the American government's money, to establish the other 80%. It's a huge scam. Now, the Second Bank of the United States lasted about 12 years until Andrew Jackson became president. Now, Andrew Jackson really hated private central banks. He ran his whole campaign on killing the bank because he felt like, hey, why the hell should we be borrowing money when we could just print our own money? I mean, it worked before. So when he became president, he fired 2,000 people who worked for the government because they were being bought by the international bankers. Now, the bankers bought some more people after that, and they got the Senate to pass a bill to approve the recharter of the private central bank for another 20 years. Now, when the bill got on Andrew Jackson's desk, of course, he vetoed the bill. And this is what he had to say about that.
It is not our own citizens only who are to receive the bounty of our government. More than 8 millions of the stock of this bank are held by foreigners. Is there no danger to our liberty and independence in a bank that in its nature has so little to bind it to our country? Controlling our currency, receiving our public monies, and holding thousands of our citizens' independence would be more formidable and dangerous than a military power of the enemy. If government would confine itself to equal protection and, as heaven does its rains, shower its favor alike on the high and the low, the rich and the poor, it would be an unqualified blessing. In the act before me, there seems to be a wide and unnecessary departure from these just principles.
Now, when the bank's charter was up, Andrew Jackson ordered his Treasury Secretary to remove the bank's deposit from its reserves. Now, he refused to do it, and he was fired, and William J. Dwayne was appointed to do the job. And he refused to do it, so he was fired, and Robert B. Taney was ordered to do it, and he did just that. Now, the Treasury Secretary from the private central bank, who was Nicholas Biddle at the time, he threatened that if they remove the bank's deposits, if they don't recharter the bank for another 20 years, that he would cause a depression. He would cause money to become scarce. Now, let me explain to you how this works. Basically, a private central bank loans money to smaller banks. Now, these smaller banks then loan that money to businesses and people. Now, if you retract the money supply, if you cause money to become scarce, then those small businesses won't be able to stay afloat. Now, those banks who loan out that money, they're going to have to do what's basically called a margin call. They're going to either have to call in the loans that they made out to those businesses or people, or raise the interest rates of those people, basically almost doubling it, because they need that money to basically stay open, because the only way they make money is to loan out money. Now, if they retract the money supply, then people who have these small businesses are not not going to be able to stay open, and people who have like mortgage loans for their houses not going to be able to afford them. So this is going to cause a depression because people are going to get fired because these companies can't stay open any longer. People are going to lose their house because they can't afford the mortgage payment. So he did just that. But still, in 1834, the bank's charter was not renewed, and Andrew Jackson defeated the private central bank. He was the only president to ever defeat the private central bank and cause them to basically be gone for over 10 years. As a matter of fact, it took him 77 years to come back. Andrew Jackson was the only president to actually balance the American budget and get America out of debt and making money. Now, when Lincoln became president in 1860, the private central banks knew that America was doing okay. They really wasn't in too much debt. Now they needed a way to create debt, and the best way to create debt and cause a need for a private central bank is war. So they basically instigated the whole civil war between the North and the South, so that America, or the North, would basically need money to fight the war against the South. But what Lincoln did, he was smart. He created the greenbacks, and the greenbacks was just like regular money, and it could be redeemed just like regular money, and he used those greenbacks to pay for the war. Now, everybody think Lincoln was assassinated because he freed the slaves. That was one of the reasons. But the main reason why they killed Lincoln was because he figured out the secret, and that was print your own money to pay for everything. And he printed money to pay for the war, which was the biggest no-no to the international bankers and the secret societies, because they caused so many wars throughout Europe and financed both sides of the war and made so much profits. And the whole thing was, whatever side won the war had to agree to pay the other side's debt. Now they was going to use this whole method against us to pay for the Civil War, but Lincoln was smart and he created greenbacks to do just that, and that was the reason why they killed him. Now, since the private central bank did not get reestablished, the bankers came up with a master plan, and that plan is still in place today. Now, Woodrow Wilson was approached by these bankers and promised the presidency if he did one thing, and that was sign into law the Federal Reserve Act. So in 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed into law the Federal Reserve Act, and that was the end of America as we know it. That was the downfall of the American economy. And finally, once and for all, in the hands of the international bankers was the American money system. Now I'll let Ron Paul's brother, explain to you what happened.
1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed. Floor of the House, where 3 members of Congress were on the floor. At that time, they only needed a majority of votes to pass it. So in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed. 20 years later, 1933, under Roosevelt, the United States was declared bankrupt. And in 1933, the Federal Reserve Private Bank says, okay, USA, what are you going to pledge as collateral on the debt you owe me? What happened by 1936? Does anybody know? We instituted Social Security system, and you and I and our children and our children's children were pledged as collateral on the debt of our government to the Federal Reserve. And that's where we're at today. It took 20 years to make this country bankrupt, and since then, our government has operated under emergency powers of our government. It is not the president that makes the decision in this country. It's the Secretary of Treasury who turns around and is put in there by the Federal Reserve to manage the bankruptcy. We've been in bankruptcy ever since. So to print $700 billion and to give it away, how do they get away with it? The manager of the bankruptcy is told by the Federal Reserve this is the way to go. That's where we're at today.
Okay, something you need to understand. First, America is bankrupt. All the money you got in your pocket represents debt, not wealth. Second, paying federal taxes is unconstitutional. You are not supposed to pay federal taxes. which is why when you go get a job, they make you fill out a W-4 form. The W-4 form basically says that you waive your rights to not pay taxes and you agree to pay federal taxes by signing that form. And no job will hire you if you don't fill out that W-4, because they won't get tax breaks and they won't get government grants if you don't fill it out. Now, for y'all people who don't really pay attention to politics, for y'all people who watch the news and believe everything that you see on the news and don't realize that the news is bought and paid for and owned by the people, the very international bankers who's running this whole scam. For y'all people who believe that Obama is here to help people, who Obama is here to save black people, come on. You need to pay attention to politics and watch what's going on. Obama is a tool of the international bankers, just like all those other sellout was. If they had it before, if they was doing this before, what makes you think they're not doing it now? They started this a long time ago, and they finally got their hands on the American economy, on the American money system. What makes you think they just gonna all of a sudden make things right?
Barack is like the manager of Burger King. All presidents are, including Bush. It's like this: when your fries are cold, if your burger is not done right, you go back to Burger King, America, or your government, and you say, my burger's cold, I want new fries. First, you go to the cashier, that's the courts. You argue to the courts. The courts, if you can't get no justice with the cashier, you say, let me see the manager. I want to go to the Supreme Court. I want to see the president. The manager comes out. Hi, what can I do for you? Now the manager can override the decisions of the cashier, but you never get to see the franchise owner of Burger King. If you really have a problem with your burger, you need to go see the franchise owner. We need to go to the top or to the bottom. We need to go to where the real architecture of government is. And it's not in a president, it's in a global scheme.
Politics in America today is identical to pro wrestling. And what I mean by that is, in front of the cameras and the public, we all hate each other. I'm going to kick my opponent's butt. I'm going to whale him from here to high water and beat the crap out of him. Yet behind the scenes, we all are friends going out to dinner.
Went to dinner together.
And it's all a work.
All intermarried. Show business.
It's showbiz. And that's what you have today in politics. The Democrats and Republicans aren't really opposed to each other.
Left and right mean nothing. The only thing that counts is, are you working for Wall Street or you're trying to defend the people against the financiers? A lot of people think that the Federal Reserve is already part of the government. They're not. It's controlled by cliques of unelected, unaccountable bankers meeting in secret. Most of these people have never even been through the formality of a Senate hearing or a Senate confirmation. They claim that they're part of the U.S. government. They masquerade as if they were part of the U.S. government. But in reality, this is a purely private operation. Jackals, hyenas, raptors, all of them loyal, not to the American people, but to the Wall Street banks, which is where most of them come from.
Everyone is pointing to Barack right now, President Obama, as saying, you got to get the economy together. You got to get the economy together. When in fact, the president has very little to do with the economy. It's the Federal Reserve chairman that at least sets the policy. That's a privately owned company, the Federal Reserve Bank. They set the agenda.
What is the proper relationship, what should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take. So long as that is in place and there is no evidence that the administration or the Congress or anybody else is requesting that we do things other than what we think is the appropriate thing, then what the relationships are don't frankly matter.
Notice what Greenspan is saying. Greenspan is saying the Federal Reserve is beyond the law. And in reality, they are in practice beyond the law. Nobody, as far as I know, has ever audited the Federal Reserve. One of the first things we ought to do when we nationalize the Fed is go in there and find out the audit. Who stole money? Who engaged in corruption? There's a whole series of people going back to Volcker, to Greenspan, to Bernanke, and so forth.
Now, since the international bankers finally got in, they finally got control of the American money system, they bankrupt America. And you gotta understand, this whole thing started with Lincoln.
So if they had telephones then, the phone would ring from Abraham Lincoln to Jefferson Davis in the South and say, President Davis, this is President Lincoln, and we need what you have. And President Davis says, ain't our problem, it's your problem. Well, it's your problem now because we're going to come and get you. And we're going to take everything you have, and we're going to call it the Civil War and say it's over slavery. Well, it's a well-known fact the governor of Maine had 65 slaves. So
it wasn't over slavery.
It wasn't slavery. I mean, that's a nice history thing, but that's just another rewrite of history.
But it was a commerce
issue. It was commerce. It's always about money. In that context, Lincoln then suspended the Constitution of the United States in 1861, and the Civil War was declared. Now, with that suspension, it comes in what we now know as executive orders. If you trace back executive orders, the first one was written in 1861. The only way they can write an executive order then and now is if the Constitution of the United States is suspended. So, therefore, we come back modern day. If you mention your constitutional rights one more time in my courtroom, I'm going to put you in jail for contempt, because there is no such thing. Okay? So now we need a new pledge. Lincoln, to his credit, figured it out, I believe, before the end of his term. And that's why he was killed. First thing he did was print greenbacks. And he was going to repudiate the debt and issue currency of the United States with no interest. Okay, that was his reorganization. Yeah. That was his reorganization plan. Okay, a bullet got in the way of that. Interestingly, 100 years later, another president tried the same thing, and he got killed too. His name was Kennedy. That's how all that ties together. Kennedy printed U.S. notes, and he was going to issue those. Lyndon Johnson's first executive order was to rescind that order that Kennedy had written to issue U.S. notes. Now, if you go then to 1860 and 61, we got to make a new pledge. We pledge all the assets of the South. And in that comes the ratification of the 14th Amendment. In 1871, there's a government called, a corporation called the Government of the District of Columbia. February 19th, 1871. In 1878, the name of that corporation is changed to the United States. Now the 14th Amendment is here. The government of the United States, a corporation is in place, and all the districts. You all live in the District of Washington, Western Division. Did you know that?
Yeah, it's amazing. I did know that, but that kind of terminology is totally foreign to us.
Yes, yes. We don't think anything of it, but you have to look at Washington, District of Columbia. Okay? What is Columbia? What is that? Anyway, to get back to our bankruptcy story.
Yeah, that is a good question. What is that?
They pledge all the assets of the South. All the gold, all the agriculture, everything. The South was paid for. They had everything. The North was bankrupt because that was where all the industry was. There was nobody, it was cold, there's no money, the bankers are squeezing them. So you go into bankruptcy again, you pledge all the assets of the South, and now you jump forward to September 17th, 1929. 45 days before October 29th, 1929. When everybody knows what happens then, the stock market crashes. Roosevelt gets elected in 1932, and the first thing he does for the first approximately 100 days is rewrite everything in this country. He stacks the Supreme Court to back every decision he makes as constitutional, but there's a problem. There's got to be another pledge made because we're still in reorganization. Now, if they've pledged the South, and in 1929 they recaptured all the land because all the farmers went bankrupt, and the banks held all the paper, what is there left to pledge? The only thing left is the people, 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 is the people.
So what does it mean to pledge the people? I mean, think about that. Pledge the people. That sounds kind of creepy, don't it? Now, think about it like this. Let's say the bank forecloses on your house, and they say to you, okay, we know you need a place to live. We know you need a place to raise your kids, so we're going to let you stay in the house. But we're going to take away all your luxuries. We're going to take away your car. We're going to take away your TV. We're going to take away your video game. And that's still not going to be enough. So if you agree to pledge us your children as collateral, then we will let you stay here. Now, what we're going to do is, when your children becomes old enough to start working and paying taxes and actually making money, we're going to take some of that money and use that money to pay down the debt you owe us on this house. And this is what has happened to America. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you're about to witness the greatest scam in human history that is still taking place today, that you are a part of, that you have no clue you are a part of. Watch this.
The government. It loves you and wants to keep you safe and well. It even wants to make paying taxes, fines, and court costs easier for you. How? Well, you'll need to meet your straw man. He was born the same day you were. He looks like you, has the same name, and lives in your house, but you never knew he existed. You will have even paid his parking tickets or taxes. The worst part? He's been dead from day one. From every birth certificate, a legal personality, or legal fiction, is created with the same name to confuse little old you into thinking it's you. So, there's a human you and a paper you, or as it's commonly known, a straw man. Think you are handing over title to the person you register it with? That's right! Whenever you register something with the government, they assume it belongs to them. Registered your car? Super! Now you are the registered keeper of your vehicle, and the government can crush it when you don't pay your, straw man's taxes. Expecting a new bundle of joy? Well then, you need to register your little darling with a birth certificate. Then they can start the process all over again and create a new straw man for your little one. Isn't that great? So when Junior grows up, he'll be able to generate revenue just like you have. When you notify on your baby by signing the birth certificate, your child becomes a ward of state. And if the government doesn't like what you're doing, they'll assume it's okay to take the child away or make new rules for things they don't like. Not enough school? Smacking your child? Shouting too loudly? Then it's off to social services for the little one. When you get a bill, it's sent to you, but belongs to your straw man, not you. That's why bills, fines, and summons start with Mr., Mrs., or Ms. Sometimes you'll see your surname in capitals, just like on a gravestone. That's because your straw man is dead, and just a silly piece of paper, created before you could comprehend or even consent to it. When you go to court, you represent your straw man, so you, the human, take on any costs, fees, taxes, and fines involved for the straw man. The human you doesn't even need to pay them. But you made a contract with the court by appearing on behalf of your legal personality or straw man, just like the government knew you would. Confused? Well, don't worry. The government doesn't want you to know anyway. If you knew, you'd stop paying things like council tax and parking tickets. Because when you go to court, you are representing your straw man. You are you. alive and made of flesh and blood. Your straw man or legal personality is a piece of paper created from your birth certificate. And you think it's you. What a silly Billy.
Woodrow Wilson, as you may know, for any of you who have done any research into the Federal Reserve, the central bankers, and the fiat currency system that we've been enslaved into, you'll know that Woodrow Wilson is the president who signed into law the Federal Reserve Act. And you may already know that the Federal Reserve is a private corporation. It's not federal. It has no reserves. It's a private corporation owned by offshore bankers. It's an offshore company that prints paper out of thin air. There was a man named Edward Mandell House, and he was Woodrow Wilson's handler. House was an Englishman. Actually, the Earl of Grey was his handler. Okay, this is what House said. Very soon, every American will be required to register their biological property. That's the birth certificate. They will be required to register their biological property in a national system designed to keep track of the people, and that will operate under the ancient system of pledging. By such methodology, we can compel people to submit to our agenda, which will affect our security as a chargeback for our fiat paper currency. Every American will be forced to register or suffer not being able to work and earn a living, the sin. They will be our chattel. That means slaves, means collateral. You're secured as collateral. They will be our chattel, and we will hold the security interest over them forever. By operation of the law merchant under the scheme of secured transactions. Americans, by unknowingly or unwittingly delivering the bills of lading to us, will be rendered bankrupt and insolvent, forever to remain economic slaves through taxation, secured by their pledges, the birth certificate. They will be stripped of their rights and given a commercial value designed to make us profit, and they will be none the wiser. For not one man in a million could ever figure out our plans. And if by accident one or two would figure it out, we have in our arsenal plausible deniability. After all, this is the only logical way to fund government, by floating liens and debt to the registrants in the form of benefits and privileges. This will inevitably reap us huge profits beyond our wildest expectations and leave every American a contributor to this fraud, which we will call social insurance. Without realizing it, every American will insure us for any loss we may incur in this manner. Every American will unknowingly be our servant, however begrudgingly. The people will become helpless, and without any hope for their redemption, we will employ the high office of the president of our dummy corporation to foment this plot against America.
This is a classified document?
No, it's not classified. It's available at thefreedompool.org, house quote, and it's a historical document. This denotes ownership, and when your parents were tricked into filling this out, they allowed your spirit and your soul to be monetized, and futures were sold on you.
Spirit and soul.
Now, this is my birth certificate. This is actually a share. See this red number? This A, I'm born in Canada, this is a Class A share. Now, this is called a CUSP number. And all securities require a CUSP number. And that's what this is. And you are held as collateral to secure the debt which our government owes to international bankers. So you and me and all these people here are actually collateral. And we don't even own our lives. We are chattel. And we believe we're free. I made an application to the Registrar General, and I got my original social insurance application. Now, before they sent it to me, they put a little piece of paper over this before they photocopied it, because my friend has his, and they didn't block this out, and when you hold it up, you see Bank of Canada. It is said that the best slaves are the ones who don't know that they're enslaved, and we all have invisible chains on us, and we don't know it.
Another question that they ask me is, how come I haven't heard this on TV, or on the radio, or in the newspaper? Well, sweetie, the simple answer to that is, the same people who own the television stations and the newspapers and the radio stations are the same people who are involved with the Federal Reserve. And here is a little statement that says that it only requires 5% ownership to significantly influence the media. Rockefeller is one of the original shareholders of the Federal Reserve. As early as 1963, the House Banking Subcommittee reported that Rockefeller, through Chase Manhattan Bank, controlled 5.9% of the stock in CBS and the bank and gained interlocking directorates with ABC. I went all the way through high school, all the way through college, all the way through testing for the CPA, and all this Irish training, and didn't hear about any of this. You think they want this information out here? For you guys to eat up and chew up and find out what's really going on? I don't think so. Now, another one. Why don't we just tell our elected officials about this? And to make a really long story short, the We the People Foundation, the same people that put out this ad, put together a hearing. And these 40 researchers, we're going to ask the IRS and the DOJ these questions, and we're going to have this big meeting in Washington called the Truth and Taxation Hearings, okay? So we got together with 537 questions. So we sent them the 537 questions so they could research and have the answers, and what did they do? They reneged on coming. They signed off on it, but they reneged on coming. So you all didn't get to hear the truth. We went on and had the hearings anyway, put it on CD, marched around Washington, giving it to all 535 congressmen and senators. Please look at this information. We got stupid responses back like, thank you for visiting our offices in Washington. The next time you come to Washington, please visit us again. They don't care. Your presidents don't care. Another one that they ask me, or they'll say something like, well, this just sounds like it's some kind of conspiracy theory. Y'all hear that a lot? Okay. But tell me this, what's the difference between a conspiracy and a strategy? Don't you understand that this is all by design? All this black, white stuff. You're white, I'm black, you know. You're Democrat, I'm a Republican. You know, y'all heard of divide and conquer before, right? Why y'all letting them do it to us? While I'm sitting up here arguing with this man about what his great-great-great-granddaddy did to mine, there's this big old fence closing in around us. And while I'm sitting here wasting time and he's sitting here telling me why he doesn't know, we need to put our heads together and figure out how to get out of this fence that these people are building around us. Am I right? Yeah. That's what we got to be. Divide and conquer, we can't let that work anymore. It's been working all these years. Then we need to get together and understand. First of all, you need to understand what is going on with your money. You work hard. It's like we're a hamster on a wheel. This country started out with taxation without representation. Where are we now? Why did we get back to where we started? We got lazy and comfortable. Get out your...
A common misconception among people is that any rule or regulation that governs them falls under one category, law. But there are many other forms of law that people abide by without realizing that they simply do not apply to them. Another misconception is that a nation's constitution gives us our rights. A constitution does nothing more than list the rights that we already have. We are born with inalienable rights, endowed to us by our Creator. They are not given to us, and they cannot be given away. The most a person can do with a right is choose whether to exercise it or not. Maritime admiralty law is what's known as the law of the water. It is superseded by civil law and only applies to those who willingly contract themselves into it. The definition of admiralty law is a body of private international law governing the relationships between private entities which operate vessels on the oceans. Let's look at how and why a form of law that is fashioned to govern corporations, businesses, and vessels has imposed its rule over natural human beings. This is all done through a form of word magic. A simple perversion of language has made it possible to convince people around the world that these alternative laws apply to them. The Barron's Dictionary of Banking Terms defines a certificate as a paper establishing an ownership claim. So right there, we notice that everyone with a birth certificate is defined as being owned. People are used as collateral with other nations because the U.S. is bankrupt. The United States declared bankruptcy on March 9th of 1933. At this point, the U.S. began taking out loans from a private, non-government affiliated corporation called the Federal Reserve. With no money to pay back the loans, the United States began using the citizens as collateral. All birth and marriage certificates are literally warehouse receipts. Just look at the similarities of warehouse receipts and birth certificates. Both document the date of issue, a serial number, registration number or receipt number, a description of the product, and an authorized informant to notify the appropriate government agency. With all of this information being readily available, the majority of people are unaware of their involvement with maritime admiralty law. This is possible through the manipulation of language. This admiralty law changed the meaning of the word person from a natural living person to a corporation. Driver's licenses, vehicle registrations, auto insurance forms, building permits, gun permits, work permits, tax filing documents, birth and death certificates, traffic citations, and many other forms of documentation that were once believed to be absolutely necessary only applied to persons or corporations. Upon signing such a legal document, you are indirectly waiving your rights under the Constitution and lowering your status to that of a corporation that is created with the same exact name as you. The only way to reconcile your true name from the name of the corporation is to take notice that the corporation has its name in all capital letters. This is known as capitis diminutia maxima.
Now, if you look it up, you'll find that before 1933, there was no birth certificates, there was no social security cards. People wrote down the birth of a baby in the back of a Bible. Now, going back to slavery. Now, there was a big debate on whether or not to give the freed slaves the same kind of rights as white people. Now, only 2 states agreed to do so. That was Pennsylvania and New York. Now, the Constitution says that a person has certain unalienable rights endowed to them by the Creator God. See, the Constitution felt like, when they wrote it, they felt like this. They felt like God gave you certain rights, and you didn't need a piece of paper or a document to give you rights. And if you needed that, then God would have made sure you was born with the necessary documents. But since you wasn't born with such documents, you were born free. So no government should be able to oppose any kind of crazy rules on you. You had certain unalienable rights. Now, back then, if you ask a white person if they're a U.S. citizen, they wouldn't know what the hell you was talking about. They wouldn't know what citizenship mean. They were called sovereigns. Now, one of the main reasons that they separated from England was because the kings were sovereign. The kings could do whatever they want. And the colonists felt like, we want everybody to be on the same kind of par. Yeah, there's going to be, levels of authority structures, but we want everybody to be equal. We want everybody to be sovereign. And sovereign means so over reign. And only basically kings and queens is sovereign. And that's how it was back then. Now, the white people was called sovereign. Now, they did not want to give black people that same title. So instead of giving us the title of sovereignty, they gave us civil rights. Now, black people was the first United States citizens. Now, the only real laws back then was basically no murder, no robbing or stealing, and you could not breach a contract. Those were like the basic laws back then. I mean, anything else, all these statutes and codes and, you know, titles and articles that we have today did not apply to sovereign people. Now, if you think about it, if you look at those old Western movies, now remember, in those old Westerns, you see a big bar fight, crazy bar fight, they in there fighting. Didn't no cop come in there and lock everybody up and send everybody to jail. Same thing when they stepped outside and had a duel. They can basically shoot somebody and kill them in the street in front of everybody, and that person won't be hauled off to jail. There was different rules back then. Now, black people didn't have the same kind of rights. They had civil rights. Now, once the government got them protected under their jurisdiction, they gave black people different rules, different laws, and Black's laws. Now, the Black Law Dictionary is still here today and it's still used today in law school, and that's where it came from. There's a whole different set of rules and laws set up to govern black people. Now, when black people became U.S. citizens, they had more laws, more rules they had to follow. They wasn't as free as white people was. Now, we know today that everybody is U.S. citizens, so how did that come to be? How did they get the white people to give up what seems to be basically complete freedom from the government to become a U.S. citizen? Now, that happened with the Great Depression. Now, the Great Depression was engineered. It was set up to do exactly that and to strip away the land and the gold from the people. Now, while the Depression happened and people were starving to death and losing their homes and everything, they became desperate. And the government offered them help, offered to buy them out, help them out, if they became U.S. citizens, if they signed the UCC-1 filing statement and changed their status from a sovereign to a U.S. citizen, would basically put them under the jurisdiction of the government. Now, when they passed the law, when they passed the Social Security Act, this forced everybody else to get a Social Security number, the birth certificate, and become U.S. citizens. Now, with the whole straw man thing, let me explain how this whole thing works. Now, this is crazy. Basically now, since that law was passed and you are born with a birth certificate, that basically creates a document that is going to be later used for you to pay taxes. Now, how this goes is this. Now, let's say, now remember, America's bankrupt, we're borrowing our money from the Federal Reserve. Now, let's say the Federal Reserve is going to give us $10 billion, right? So America's going to borrow $10 billion from the Federal Reserve. Now, when this happened, remind you, all the money that was in place at that time became obsolete, it became worthless. And the only money that was worth anything was the new money being printed by the Federal Reserve. So, no money is in circulation. We borrowed $10 billion from the Federal Reserve Bank. Now, the Federal Reserve loans us that money at interest. But think about it. If they only give us $10 billion, how are we going to pay the interest payments when only $10 billion is in existence? Where are we going to get the rest of the money from? If you only gave us $10 billion, how are we going to pay you that money back plus interest? This is how the whole straw man thing comes into place. Now, you have to really think deep about this because this is kind of crazy. You have to think about how much money that you're going to generate by your parents just being pregnant with you. Now, your mom's pregnant. She's going to go out and buy things. That is going to create tax money. Now, the doctor is going to get paid for taking care of you. Now, with that money he's going to go out and buy things, and that's going to create tax money. He's going to have to pay sales taxes on it. So just because you're born, you're generating money already. Now, your parents are going to have a baby shower. And all those people who come to the baby shower are going to go out and buy things. And that's going to generate tax money for the government. More tax money. Now, those stores who get that money are going to use that money to buy more stuff. And that's going to generate more tax money. So before you are born, you have already generated millions of dollars in tax revenue for the government. Now, when you are born, think about how much money you generate. you generate millions of dollars, millions. So by the time you're 65 and you retire, you would have generated probably $100 billion in tax money for the government. Now that is a commodity. That is something that you can borrow against because it's guaranteed you are going to pay money. So what they do is this. They take your birth certificate and they basically go ahead and sell it to other countries like China. So they say to China, hey, this person is going to pay $100 billion by the time they're 65. We want only, let's say, 20 billion of that 100 billion. Poof, there you go. Now, since 4 million babies are born in America every year, you do that times 4 million. That's a lot of money a year for the government. Now, the whole thing is this. We can say to China or the other countries that, we'll give you X amount of dollars per month to pay down the rest of the money we owe you, or we'll give you X amount of dollars a year to pay down the money we owe you. But the thing is, if the American dollar keeps going down and devaluing, then they're never going to make up their money if the dollar crashes. So they use the interest payment, or they use the money they make off of this whole straw man thing, off of your birth certificate, to pay down the interest payment that they owe to the Federal Reserve. Now what they have did was basically take international maritime law, which is the law of the water, and make it the law of the land. Now let me explain to you how they did that. Now, according to international maritime law, all ships are female by law. Now, a ship, when it comes into port, it berths at the dock. And if that ship is carrying, let's say, TVs, each one of those TVs has to have a certificate of manifest, because it wasn't there yesterday, it manifested today. Because whatever country that ship comes to, it's going to be making money for that country. Taxes are going to be paid on those TVs, so it has to have a certificate. Now, it's the same thing with your mom. Your mom gives birth to the dock, and you are born and you have to have a birth certificate, because you are now going to be paying taxes, or later paying taxes, to the government, to the place where you are born. You have just become a product, an international maritime product, basically, which is now the law of the water is now the law of the land. Now, a ship has cargo in its belly. Your mom had you in her belly, and both of you are products for the American government. Both of you are going to be paying taxes and making money for the government. Now, and this whole thing works with court too. Now, because you are a U.S. citizen, all these rules apply to you. You are not supposed to go to court for anything but those laws that I mentioned before: stealing, robbing, murder, or breach of contract. Anything else, you are not supposed to be going to court for at all. It is unconstitutional. Now, I want you to take a look at something. Think about this. Now, when you go to court, you see that brown bar there. Look at that bar closely. Look at it. What does it look like to you? Doesn't it look like the same bar that's on those old wooden ships? When you come up on the ramp to get on the ship, you pass the bar. You open that little door, it looks the same way. It's because it's a ship. Ships fly flags. When you go to court, the flags are being flown. You can see them up there next to the judge. Now, the judge sits at a bench. Now, the Latin word for bench is bank. Look it up. It's bank. Where do we find banks? We find banks at rivers, riverbanks. What does riverbanks do? They direct the flow of the currency, the money. Now, this is not a play on words. This has all been set up and designed after international maritime law. The law of the water is now the law of the land. See, the judge is there because somebody is going to be paying money. So the judge is there for the bank. He represents the bank. He doesn't care who won or lose. He's going to get paid either way. He is there representing the bank. That's why he sits on the bench, which is Latin for bank. Now, as soon as you step in court and you say, I'm here, when they call your name, you have just agreed to represent that straw man, as she showed you in the video. Now, you got to think about how this comes into play in a lot of different things. Now, we tell people, they tell you, make sure your kid wear a helmet. Make sure your kid is strapped in the child seat. Make sure your kid wears pads, and make sure your kid goes to school and learns stuff. They're not saying this stuff. They're not making parents go to jail because their kid's not going to school for no reason. They're doing this to protect their investment. They don't give a damn about your kids. That's why they take your kids away from you if you start treating them wrong. They are protecting their investments. Your kids are the government's investments. They want to make sure your kids grow up and mature, just like mutual funds, just like freaking stock certificates. They want to make sure they grow up and mature and become somebody and get a job so they can pay their taxes, so they can pay back China and all these other countries who they borrow money from. So now maybe you understand why the government is going so crazy over immigration law, because those people are undocumented, meaning they don't have social security numbers. So when they come in, they're not paying any taxes. So the government's not getting its cut. They don't have any social security numbers at all. No birth certificates from America. So they are undocumented. The government's not getting their cut, and they're taking away from people who are documented, who could have those jobs to pay them their money. That's why they're pushing this whole immigration reform thing. Sure, they'll let you in the country, but they want you to be a citizen first so they can get their money. Now, you gotta understand, only a corporation can get money from a corporation. Basically, only a corporation can legally deal with another corporation. So they basically made you a corporation with the whole straw man thing. That's what your birth certificate was used for, to create another you, as she showed you in the video. Now, if you look at any bill you have, any bill you got, anything involving money that comes in the mail, your name will always be in capital letters. Any bill you get from the hospital, any bill, your phone bill, your electric bill, gas bill, all those bills, your name will always be in capital letters. Now people look at that and they never put it in their head that something is up. Why is my name in capital letters? But this is how they get you. This is how they use your straw man. That doesn't apply to you. It applies to your straw man. But since your straw man don't exist, you're going to be the one who paid those bills. Now, it's a way to get around this whole thing, and depending on the response I get from this video, I'll show you how to beat that whole system. Okay, so I'm going to give you a perfect example of how Hollywood and the government laughs in your face about this whole straw man thing, and you don't even know what they're talking about. Now, there's a lot of movies out there that kind of illustrate or kind of give you little hints into this whole straw man business, but a lot of people don't figure it out. A lot of people can't read the symbology and or the symbolism of these movies and books. Now, most of you, or all of you by now, should have seen the movie The Wizard of Oz. Now, The Wizard of Oz was written back in the year 1900 by a man named Frank Baum. It was just a book called The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And in 1939, MGM changed it into a movie, the one that you all seen. Now, the whole thing about that movie is you got to really pay attention to that movie. I mean, I know it's a good movie to watch, and it's a children's movie, so a lot of grown-ups probably, don't get into it as much as kids do. But when you really dig into that movie and look at it, you could kind of see the symbolism behind the movie and how it relates to the federal bank and the whole straw man thing. Now, first, Dorothy. Dorothy represents the people, the regular people, and their good spirit and how they're generally nice people and just want to live their life and just want the finer things in life. Now the ruby slippers represent the power that the people have, but they don't know how to use. Remember when she get the ruby slippers on her feet, the evil wicked witch says that she doesn't know how to use the power. She doesn't even know about the power. Now, the Wicked Witch of the East, the one who died, represents the dead corporations from the East, all the dead companies that went under after the Great Depression. And the Wicked Witch of the West represents London or the UK. Now, if you split the earth right down the middle, you have the Western Hemisphere and the Eastern Hemisphere, then basically London and the UK just makes it into the Western Hemisphere. So the Wicked Witch, the Good Witch, she represents basically the Senate and the power that the Senate has but won't use. Now, when you think about it, remember, she tells the Wicked Witch of the West she has no power here. So she has the power to basically get rid of the Wicked Witch, but she doesn't. She also doesn't just come out and tell Dorothy how to use the slippers. Remember, at the end, But Witch just says, hey, click your heels together 3 times, say it's no place like home. So basically, all this time you could have told me how to get home. How come you didn't? We're gonna get to that part. Now, she basically represents the Senate, who has the power, who can basically fix everything, but won't. Now, you have the yellow brick road. The yellow brick road, what does it look like to you? It looks like bars of gold, golden bars, look at it. Bars of gold that lead to where? To the Emerald City. And the color of emerald is green. The color of money is green. And who makes the money? The Federal Reserve Bank. So it represents the gold that disappeared into the Federal Reserve Bank, and the Emerald City basically represents the Federal Reserve. Now Toto. Toto means everything. Remember, the witch says, I'll get you and your little dog too, meaning I'll get you and everything. And remember, the Wicked Witch of the West basically wants to take away the power from the people, and the power is the ruby slippers. Now, in the book, the original book, the ruby slippers are not ruby, they are silver. And that's just something you need to know. Now, they keep going and they run into the Scarecrow. Now, that's an easy one. The Scarecrow is the straw man, represents you as well. The straw man, and the straw man needs a brain. Basically saying if he had a brain, he would figure this whole thing out. Now we get to the Tin Man. The Tin Man, T-I-N, tax identification number. The Tin Man represents you as well. It basically represents the hard-working man who works so hard till he's old and rusted and he can't do anything. And if he had any heart, he would figure this thing out, or have the courage to figure this thing out as well. Cowardly Lion. Now, the Cowardly Lion basically represents the Senate and the courts. Basically, all the freaking councilmen and all the people who also have the power to fix things, but just won't do it. Now, if you look at all these old court buildings and old council buildings, you always see a lion outside. You always see like a stone lion statue or something outside of these courts and councilman buildings. Now, if you think about it, the Cowardly Lion basically had the power to defeat those monkeys, but it was too busy being a coward. Now, the monkeys, by the way, represents the Senate as well. Now, represents politicians. Now, if you go back to the 30s to a lot of the comics they used to draw in the newspaper, they always represented the politicians as flying monkeys. So that's what that is, flying monkeys. Now, okay, so they keep going. They finally get to Oz, and they get to see the wizard. Now, the wizard, who is basically the head of the Federal Reserve Bank, is basically tricking everybody and tricking everybody into believing that he's this great and powerful Oz. Now, think about Oz, O-Z, ounces. What do we measure gold in? Ounces, O-Z. That's why it's called the Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the powerful, great and powerful Wizard of Gold, Oz. Now, the wizard is tricking everybody into believing that he's this great and powerful man. Now, basically trying to show you in the movie, if you pay attention to everything, you can figure this out. Now, who is everything? I just told you, Toto. Now, when they finally paid attention to everything, or Toto, they seen that Toto was pulling back the curtain and revealing the secret that this is some bullshit. Because they paid attention to everything, or Toto, they found out the truth. Now, once they found out the truth, the great and powerful wizard starts to bitch up. He starts to be nice to them. Now, pay attention to what he gives the Scarecrow. Now, he's talking to him, and he gives the Scarecrow a certificate representing the birth certificate. He gives the birth certificate to the straw man, you. Now, listen to what he says about where that certificate comes from. He says it comes from E pluribus unum, which is all over the money.
By virtue of the authority vested in me by the Universitatis Comitiatum e pluribus unum, e pluribus unum, e pluribus unum, I hereby confer upon you the honorary degree of THD.
Now, if you pay attention to the Federal Reserve Bank, if you look at the money, you always find E pluribus unum. It's everywhere. And what it really means is one from many. Now, he gives the Tin Man, or the tax identification number, he gives him a heart. But the heart is attached to some kind of rope. And it's a clock. It's a ticking clock. Now, that basically means your time is almost up. Now, to me, that has a deeper meaning. It means a lot. It means like what I was saying before about how you work so hard and you basically go through life. You spend most of your life, most of your time in your life going to school and working for what? To pay some money to survive. And that's not what life's about. And you basically have a clock. And you're going to look up and see that you spent most of your time doing something that you really didn't want to do, and now you only got a little bit of time left to survive, to live. So that's what that means to me. Now, you get basically to the end, and now when you pay attention, they don't never punish the wizard for tricking everybody. They basically let him go. They let him get into a balloon and go. He caused inflation, and he left on inflation. So I mean, it was no punishment. And it goes back to what the guy was saying. We have in our arsenal plausible deniability, meaning that even if y'all figure this whole thing out, guess what? We still gonna get away. We just gonna say, well, we ain't know. I mean, but if you know what I know, you pay attention to what I've been showing you, you know they know. Now, finally, the Senate or the good witch says, tap your heels together 3 times and you get to go home. Basically saying what I was saying before, she had the power the whole time to help her out, but she was scared to do it, and she didn't want to do it because, you know, the great and powerful wizard was running everything, and now that he's beaten, now finally she want to help her out. And, you know, she finally goes home, and basically the whole thing is a dream. She wakes up. Now, to me, that's like them basically saying that if you think you really gonna figure this whole thing out, you think you really gonna be able to do this stuff, then you dreaming. You know, the whole thing is a dream, but it's a deep message. And to me, it's also saying, wake up. It's saying, wake up and realize what's going on. Wake up and understand that you have been tricked and these people are deceiving you. Now, I want to explain the whole banker bailout thing and what that whole thing was about in 2008. Now, a lot of people know that the banks were bailed out and the stock market just about crashed, and we went into a kind of mini depression. Now, a lot of people don't understand what that was all about. Now, what happened was these international bankers, they got their media, which most of them own. They own the media, they own the news companies, but I'm gonna explain that to you later. What they did was they got the media to report that people should invest in the economy. They should invest in real estate and invest in mortgages and invest in these things called derivatives. So all the major banks, all the big companies start investing in mortgages, start buying up mortgages, start buying up real estate, start buying up these derivatives. So when a smaller bank seen that the big banks was doing this, they did the same thing. They started investing in these things. Companies started investing in these things. And they wanted it to get big and big and big. That's exactly what the scam was about. It was about getting as much companies to invest into this whole thing and get all the companies they didn't own into this whole thing. So once they got enough companies in it, they pulled the rug from under them. So what they did was they got the media to start reporting that these derivatives was corrosive and the market is not doing as well, and these mortgages are not doing as well as we thought they was, and people can't afford these mortgages, so the stocks went down, of course. Now these companies who they was trying to buy up did not want to sell, so they had to create a reason for them to need to sell. Now the bankers who was behind all this thing, who own these major banks, they got those banks to come out and say, well, listen, we're in trouble. They got them to play victim. So they was like, hey, we're in trouble and we need to be bailed out, because if we go under, then all these other companies who get money from us are going to go under. All these small companies are going to go under, and millions of people are going to lose their jobs. So of course, this pissed Congress off.
Secretary Paulson came in with the Vice President and Fed Chairman Bernanke and made all these assurances that there was absolutely a critical, immediate need to get rid of the corrosive derivative products, all the different names for this, ubiquitous, sub-S retraded credit default swap, blah, 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 blah. Okay, but they talked about them as though they knew what the hell they were. You got the money and you immediately said, what items, what auction?
Now the Treasury just basically cut that out of the bill. And what we have here is a situation where banks are hoarding the money that they're getting from the TARP. They're using the money to purchase other banks. And all of a sudden, the Treasury sent a signal to the banks, forget about it. We're going to give you the money that you want, and you do what you want with it. Unless you direct it specifically, it's not going to happen. I don't think anyone questions, Mr. Kashkari, that you're working hard. Our question is who you're working for.
And of course, Congress could see that this whole thing was a big scam. And a lot of people in Congress wanted to let the banks fail. They was like, okay, well, so what? They was going to let the banks go under. Now, for you people who don't believe that the stock market is controlled, then go buy some Apple stock. Go buy some shares in Apple. And then if the CEO comes on TV and say, hey, Apple not doing so good, watch how fast you lose your money. Now that's exactly what happened. They came on TV and they got the media to report that the Congress wasn't giving up that money fast enough. And soon as they reported that, stock started to fall. The Dow plunged over 700 points. And those companies who needed these banks to stay open, their stock dropped as well. It was just like with Nicholas Biddle, when he threatened that he would cause a depression if the bank's charter wasn't renewed. Here they was trying to cause a depression with this whole stock market thing crashing. Now, they was trying to do worse than that.
The only way they can pass this bill is by creating and sustaining a panic atmosphere. That atmosphere is not justified. Many of us were told in private conversations that if we voted against this bill on Monday, that the sky would fall, the market would drop 2,000 or 3,000 points the first day, another couple thousand the second day, and a few members were even told that there would be martial law in America if we voted no. That's what I call fear-mongering. Unjustified.
And of course we know the banks got bailed out. Now the bank bailout bill only included major banks. It didn't include the smaller banks and mortgage companies. Now that was the whole point. The whole point was to scam them out of their companies, to buy up these smaller banks and mortgage companies so they can own as much property as possible. Now you got to think about how many homes out there. It's millions of houses out there that are bought and paid for. I mean, people own these houses. They don't have to pay no mortgage. They're just sitting there. The property is owned. And you got old people still living in these houses, or they pass those houses down to kids or whatever like that. Now, this whole thing goes back to the 90s when they started the whole home equity loan thing. The whole home equity loan thing was to get those houses, was to get those struggling old people or those struggling people who own these properties to take money off of their house. So they would say like, hey, your house is worth $100,000. You need some money. We'll give you $80,000, on your house, and you take out another mortgage, and you just pay the money down until you pay it off, and with interest, of course. Now, mort means death. Engage mean a value object as a guarantee of good faith. So mortgage means death as a value object as a guarantee of good faith. Because when you sign that mortgage form, there's a clause in there that says, we can take out a life insurance policy on you just in case you die before you pay that money off. Now, if you leave your house to somebody when you die, then they're going to collect that insurance money, and that person's still going to have to pay what you didn't pay. It's a double dip. Now, since these small banks and mortgage companies didn't get bailed out, they had to call in a lot of loans to small companies, small businesses, and mortgages. So a lot of companies went out of business, a lot of people lost their homes, and for the first time in 2008, white people got to feel like black people feel all the time. They got to feel like the government is fucking them over. Now, the whole thing with the bank bailout bill was when they got that money, the big banks were supposed to loan money to the smaller banks so they could stay afloat. In exchange for that, those smaller banks would not force these small companies and these people who had these mortgages to raise their interest rates or raise their rents or whatever like that. So it went from like people were paying $2,000 a month for a mortgage to $5,000 a month. So of course they can't afford it anymore, and they couldn't pay the banks back their money. So the banks couldn't pay the bigger banks. So the bigger banks said, okay, well, we're just gonna buy you out. And that's exactly what they did. Once again, the bad guy wins. So we know the banks bought up these smaller mortgage companies and these smaller banks. And instead of really helping the economy, they gave their CEOs $1 million bonuses and raises. And now today, the economy is messed up. The economy is not doing well. They keep reporting that it's doing well, but it's not doing well at all. Pay attention to the numbers. So how can we fix this whole thing? And believe it or not, it's very easy, very simple to do. And a bunch of people has brought this up to Congress, but Congress don't seem to listen to it. Now, it's called a financial transaction tax. If we impose a financial transaction tax on Wall Street, it could raise billions of dollars. Now we're talking about 3 cents of every $100. It could raise billions of dollars. Also, banks contribute less than 2% of total tax revenue. Less than 2% of total tax revenue. Think about that. That's crazy. If they just contribute 4%, it would create billions of dollars. But instead of doing that, they choose to cut Social Security, cut Medicare, and cut welfare, cut school budgets, cut all these budgets, all these things is going to help the community and help the people. There's supposed to be a government for the people, by the people. And as soon as people start realizing that they're scamming you, things will change. Now, if I'm a crook and I work for a person that has infinite money, as long as they're going to let me keep scamming them, I'm a scammer. And I'm going to get money from my friends and bring them in so they can scam. And then when they grow up and have kids, guess what? We're going to bring them in so they can scam. And that's what's been going on for years, hundreds of years. But the people don't want to wake up. And when information like this, like a guy like me who's not a famous celebrity, comes out and try to wake people up and talk to people, nobody wants to listen. Nobody don't want to listen to me. I'm not Jay-Z, I'm not Tyrese. So what I have to say is not really important when this information is affecting you every single day, and you may not think you see it, but you feel it every day. So the whole banker bailout thing, people really know what happened there. They know it was a scam. But the media is not trying to say, hey, American people, they scammed you. Look, here's the information, here's the proof. How come the media is not doing that when the information is right there? The same thing with this whole Wall Street financial transaction tax. How come the media is not saying, hey, American people, look, this is how we can fix everything. This right here can fix the whole country, and we'll still have money left over to help Africa and all these other countries. Look, check this out. You need to see this. How come the media is not doing that? How come the media is not doing what I'm doing right now? How come they're not informing the people? Well, the first thing you need to know is every single TV station, every channel that you know of, is owned by 6 companies. Now take a look at this. Now, these 6 companies own everything. They call them the Big 6. It's Viacom. You have Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, Comcast, who bought GE, Disney, Time Warner, and CBS. Now, as you can see, they own just about everything. Now, Clear Channel and Sirius owns all the radio stations. Warren Buffett and Disney and Time Warner owns all the magazines and newspapers. Now, these 10 companies own just about every single product you buy from the store. Everything. They own them all. And it's the same with cars, clothes, shoes. Everything is owned by a small group of people that's controlling the world. Now, how many people know what fascism is? Fascism is when corporations control government. Now, this is the symbol for fascism. Why is the symbol for fascism on the back of our dime? Now, fascist derives from faggot. A faggot is a bundle of sticks, and as you can see, it's a bundle of sticks there. Now, why would the symbol that stands for the government being controlled by corporations be on our money? And even more than that, why would this symbol be here in the Senate? Why would that symbol be there? Because corporations control government. And these people who own these corporations are running everything. And as long as they give you Britney Spears and Lindsay Lohan and sports and Beyonce and Jay-Z and radio, all this popular culture, as long as they get you worried about stupid stuff, you're never going to figure it out. They're throwing it right in your face. We are a fascist country and we can be bought. It's right there. Why is it there? A lot of people saw that thing there. They don't even know what it means. They don't know what it stands for. It's been sitting there for years. So how come nobody has asked that question? Why is the symbol for fascism in the Senate? As long as you let these people keep scamming you, they're never going to stop. Now, the CEOs of all these companies are a part of the Illuminati. Now, you can sit there and you can think that this whole Illuminati, secret society, skull and bones thing is just some bullshit. It's just like some movie stuff. Now, and that's what movies are there for. They're there to desensitize you to the truth. That's why it doesn't bother you when you see somebody dead in the street that much, because TV has desensitized you, and that's the purpose of it. Now, do you really think that these news anchors are going to come out and tell you the truth when they know that the owners are somebody who can kill them? Now, it's a lot of news anchors who have been killed because of what they said.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go
I'm
on.
sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322?
First of all, he's not the nominee. And, look, I look forward...
Are you prepared to lose?
No, I'm not going to lose.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us?
Not much, because it's a secret.
Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code?
I wish there were something secret I could manifest.
322, a secret number?
There are all kinds of secrets, Tim, but one thing is not a secret. I disagree with this president's direction that he's taking the country. We can do a better job, and I intend to do it.
And we'll be watching. Be safe on the campaign trail. John Kerry, thanks for joining us. And we'll be right back.
I'm Tom Brokaw, NBC News, and it is my sad duty to report this afternoon that my friend and colleague, Tim Russert, the moderator of Meet the Press and NBC's Washington bureau chief, collapsed and died early this afternoon while at work at the NBC News Bureau in Washington. Tim had just returned from a family trip to Italy with his wife, Maureen Orth, the writer, and his son, Luke. They were celebrating Luke's graduation from Boston College just this spring. Tim, of course, has been the host of Meet the Press longer than any other person in that long-running television broadcast. And he has been a very familiar face on this network and throughout the world of political journalism as one of the premier political analysts and journalists of his time.
And so what do we get now in Barack Obama? Well, I've got videos, by the way. This election, we're going to vet him. I've got videos. This election, we're going to vet him from his college days to show you why racial division and class warfare are central to what Hope and Change was sold in 2008. The videos are going to come out. The narrative is going to come out that Barack Obama met a bunch of silver ponytails back in the 1980s, like Bill and Bernadine Dorn, who, equally radical, said one day we're going to have the presidency, and the rest of us slept while they plotted and they plotted and they plotted, and they oversaw hundreds of millions of dollars in the Annenberg Challenge, and they had real money from real capitalists. Barack Obama is a radical. We should not be afraid to say that. And that is who's in the White House, and that's who's outside right now telling you you don't have a right to be here, and who would squelch your free speech just as easily they do at Harvard, Vassar, Yale, Wesleyan. They're a bunch of totalitarian freaks. They tried to defeat the Tea Party, and when they failed, they wanted their Tea Party. And what did they create? They created the Occupy movement. These are the same exact people that organized Camp Casey at Crawford. That was Occupy Crawford. These are the same exact people that went down the highway at the exact time at the end of the summer when Katrina happened. That was Occupy New Orleans. It's the same radicals. They've been in your life since Senator Obama became part of your vocabulary. They are at war with you. Take that what you will. And this is my thesis, that the anti-war movement was never about anti-war. It was a Saul Alinsky community organizing tool to get Barack Obama and the left elected. That the Republican Party and the conservative movement is not what ABC and CBS puts on the screen. They try to portray you in the worst possible light. And when I walk through CPAC, where I travel the United States to meet people in the Tea Party who care, black, white, gay, and straight, anyone that's willing to stand next to me to fight the progressive left, I will be in that bunker. And if you're not in that bunker because you're not satisfied with this candidate, more than shame on you, you're on the other side.
A few days ago, I made the commitment that I would get to the bottom of Andrew Breitbart's death. I have a personal investment in this investigation. I believe that were the same thing to happen to me and Andrew Breitbart was left alive or yet alive, that he would seek to find out if I had been whacked, the administration, the Obama administration, or any other governmental agency would have been involved in the removal of my presence from this earth. I've now, in my second investigation on this matter, have discovered that WikiLeaks published an article that bin Laden's death or body was not buried at sea, and that the body was taken back to Dover Air Force Base on a plane that was guarded by the CIA and was examined, and there it was to be cremated. Now, Drudge reported that this week, and then they quickly withdrew the story, along with other major news agencies that was going with the WikiLeaks story, but for whatever reason, they withdrew it in midstream. Sources have been able to determine that the reason why Andrew Breitbart was killed was because he had discovered incontrovertible evidence that the Chinook helicopter that went down in Afghanistan in August was taken down by a suicide bomber, one of the 8 Afghans that was on that Chinook helicopter, and 22 of the members of the Navy SEAL Team 6, this very same team that was alleged to have captured and killed Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad, Pakistan, going back to April or May of 2011. This Navy SEAL team was killed. They were killed that they might remain silent about there was no raid, there was no Osama bin Laden body, and that it was all a hoax. Now, anybody who's been around the military for any length of time would know 22 Navy SEAL teams, 30 Americans all total, and 8 Afghanistan Taliban soldiers on a Chinook helicopter, and then they all go down in one fell swoop. Very, very suspicious. There was no Osama bin Laden killing. There was no Osama bin Laden capture. It was all a hoax, mainly to do 2 things. One, to camouflage and to quieting the questions about Barack Hussein Obama's eligibility and the birth certificate that he presented, that it was a forgery, and to change the views, change the direction, change the conversation in America. What more would change the conversation? What were the 2 biggest issues going on underground and above ground in America? Underground was the fact that Obama is not a U.S. citizen, that he is wholly ineligible. He is not constitutionally eligible, rather. Let me put it that way. Obama is not constitutionally eligible. That was conversation number 1. Conversation number 2 that had faded but was still major was that Barack Hussein Obama now has killed and captured the most wanted man on the planet in Osama bin Laden. 2 of the major conversations, and one canceled out the other. It was a very shrewd move by the Obama administration. There were 2 fakes presented to us in April. One was the fake birth certificate, The other was the fake death certificate of Osama bin Laden. Two major fakes that the world will not soon forget, and I will continue to uncover. The CIA is now headed by David Petraeus. He was promoted out of the field. Obama brought him out of the field because he knew that there was no raid at Abbottabad, that crashed helicopter was simply a staged helicopter crash. There was no capture, there was no killing of Osama bin Laden, there was no transfer to the U.S. Carl Vinson, and there was no burial at sea. Now, WikiLeaks leaked the story, and Drudge and other major news agencies carried it, including the Associated Press, but in the middle of the day, they retracted the story, saying there was not enough evidence. WikiLeaks had the evidence, and the evidence is still there. Breitbart was killed because he had the evidence before WikiLeaks. Not before WikiLeaks, but from WikiLeaks, before WikiLeaks leaked the information to the press. Indeed, WikiLeaks had this information prior to. They had leaked it to Breitbart. Breitbart was sitting on it. The CIA knew that Breitbart had it. They whacked him. WikiLeaks then released the information. They released it. Now, here's the scenario. Sean Hannity said that he was going to release the tapes that Breitbart spoke about at CPAC.
I've got videos, by the way. This election, we're going to vet him. I've got videos. This election, we're going to vet him from his college days.
Which was nothing, just Obama's rowdy anarchist days at Harvard, but there was nothing to it. The release of that information by Sean Hannity was a fraud and an insult to the integrity of investigative journalism. Here's a scenario. Breitbart had received from WikiLeaks the information that there was no raid at Abbottabad, that Osama bin Laden was not killed, that General David Petraeus had been removed from his field command and kicked up to the level of CIA to keep him quiet about the fact that there was no raid, that the army that was not involved in moving from Afghanistan to Abbottabad, Pakistan. He was given a high-ranking position to keep him quiet. Leon Panetta, who was a CIA agent who knew there was also nothing, was kicked up to the Secretary of Defense. Breitbart knew this, and you can document it yourself. Just go back and check the records of the date that Chinook helicopter went down with 22 Navy SEALs on board. I mean, why would you put all that, your eggs in one basket? And that Chinook helicopter, the weaponry plan, the defense plan, the deployment plan of the Chinook is that they should fly in tandem, two of them. And that there's radar, there's air cover, there's all kinds. You don't shoot down a Chinook helicopter. You might shoot a Huey, but you don't shoot down a Chinook, and everybody knows that. My friend Captain Neil Turner suggested and intimated that very possibly on board that ship, Chinook, was a suicide bomber of the 8 Afghans of the Taliban military that brought that Chinook helicopter down. Now there is complete silence. The 22 Navy SEAL team operatives are dead, and dead men don't talk.
Now, if you think that those are coincidences, if you think that these people they died of natural causes or, heart attacks and stuff like that, if you think this was just an accident or things of that nature, then you are very naive. There is none as blind as he who will not see. And a lot of people don't want to see what's going on. A lot of people don't want to understand that this whole thing is controlled. I mean, we are under control. Now, you got these religious people talking about, oh, we're going to receive the mark of the beast and all this and that from the Bible. Now, you watched the first video, already proved the Bible is bullshit, but you are already marked. You are marked. You have a social security number, and you can't do nothing without that number. You can't go buy a home, you can't buy a car. Your social security number is going to follow you everywhere. And as long as they can track that, they can track you. There's no need for a microchip. Yeah, a microchip can pinpoint your exact location, but come on. Where do you think you're going to hide? These people got cameras in space. Where do you think you're going to hide? So if these things can fix the economy, if these taxes can repair the economy, how come they have not done it yet? We can spend trillions of dollars on the bailout and trillions of dollars on the freaking war, but we can't fix a pothole or save our children's schools. Why is that? Because these people who run this thing, they want one thing. They want to control the world. They want a new world order.
What do you think the most important thing is for Barack Obama? Obviously, you're here to talk about the anniversary for U.S.-China diplomatic relations, but if you had to say this is going to be the country or the conflict or the place that will define the Obama administration, what would it be?
But he can give a new impetus to American foreign policy, partly because the reception of him is so extraordinary around the world. I think his task will be to develop an overall strategy for America in this period when really a new world order can be created. It's a great opportunity. It isn't such a crisis.
The way we're going to win over the long term is not just militarily. We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
Now that we know Vice President Dick Cheney and Senator Barack Obama are distant cousins, the New York Post decided to check into the genealogy of President Bush, and his family tree has people talking. Early Show national correspondent Tracy Smith has the story of George W. Bush's many relations.
My honor to bring to you the 41st president, a great dad, George H.W. Bush.
We all know his father, but what about his cousins? Check out this family tree, done with research by Ancestry.com.
What would you say if I told you he's related to all of those people?
You're wrong.
Oh, no, I'm not. Let me take you through this, branch by branch.
The 101st Airborne Division, Air Assault.
Vice President Dick Cheney, the man who's only a heartbeat away from the presidency, is actually a blood relation. He's President Bush's 9th cousin once removed. Cheney's cousin Barack Obama is also Bush's 11th cousin and the 9th cousin of Brad Pitt. But we're only just getting started. President Lincoln was President Bush's 7th cousin 5 times removed, and Bush shared more than just a ballot with John Kerry. That's right, they're 9th cousins twice removed.
Really?
What do you think of that?
Yeah, they have the same chin.
There's also royalty in the Bush bloodline. Princess Diana was Bush's 11th cousin twice removed. And then there's this bombshell.
Happy birthday, Mr. President.
Sure, she may have been singing to JFK, but what about GWB? He is, after all, her 9th cousin 3 times removed.
Maybe it's the eyebrows. I think the
They have the same eyebrows?
He's also related to Playboy founder Hugh Hefner, even Pocahontas, and Vlad the Impaler. Trace the family tree far enough, and you get Madonna, Celine Dion, and Tom Hanks.
So last September 17th, I became the first journalist in U.S. history to go to the U.S. National Archives and the Library of Congress and pore over the thousands of pages of documents in both places to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt or any refutation of the facts that Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. Bush, and George Herbert Walker, his maternal great-grandfather for whom his daddy is named, were Nazi traitors to the country who should have been tried for treason. 2 weeks ago, in early August, a major world newspaper, The Guardian of London, finally got on the story internationally, and they flew a renowned reporter of theirs named Duncan Campbell over to Washington to take me back to the archives and Library of Congress so that they could verify that these explosive documents were real and I didn't have forged copies. Prescott Bush was the grandfather of George W. Bush and the father of George Herbert Walker Bush, and George Herbert Walker Bush is named for his father-in-law, George Herbert Walker. Prescott Bush graduated from Yale in 1917 and was in Skull and Bones with E. Roland Harriman, who was the younger brother of W. Averill Harriman. So he brought Prescott Bush first into Brown Brothers Harriman and then Union Banking Corporation. In actuality, it was anything but a bank. It was essentially a Nazi money laundering operation that had a lot of tentacles into a lot of different other businesses. They owned a shipping line called Hamburg American Line, for example, which was the first Nazi front business seized, although the line was no longer operational in 1942. In the early 1930s, it transported Nazi spies into the U.S., and then their promotional ads offered cash rewards to any American citizens who would go back on Hamburg American lines and proselytize for Hitler. 8 months after the U.S. had entered the war, the New York Herald Tribune ran a front-page article, "Hitler's Angel has $3 million in U.S. bank." And it caused a major scandal and just rocked the world of politics. Brown Brothers Harriman, which George Herbert Walker and Prescott Bush were affiliated with and partners in, worked with I.G. Farben, which operated Auschwitz. Prescott Bush, he did a number of things that were not only anti-American but were pro-Hitler, and he did all that he could to proselytize for Hitler and the rise of his Third Reich, because the largest client, Fritz Thyssen, of his patron, W. Averill Harriman, dictated what kind of behavior he would practice to enhance his own career. So he was put on the board of directors of Union Banking Corporation, and he was also a shareholder in Union Banking Corporation along with E. Roland Harriman. But what's interesting about what the documents show is that they clearly state that all of the shareholders were phantom shareholders for Fritz Thyssen and did his bidding directly. So the point I'm making is it's not as if they bought these shares of stock as a passive investment to hopefully profit from the war. They were directly doing the bidding of the individual who built the Nazi war machine. Some very shocking documents that I saw at the Library of Congress 2 weeks ago on August 10th. On August 9th, excuse me, had to do with the hearings of the McCormick-Dickstein Committee of November 1934, show that Prescott Bush and the DuPont family, the Remington family, and J.P. Morgan tried to overthrow the U.S. government, assassinate FDR, and put a Hitler-style fascist state in place. I have in my possession testimony from the McCormick-Dickstein Committee in November of 1934 by one of the fascist plotters that they were going to follow Hitler's model exactly and impose martial law on the United States, round up unemployed people that were worthless to the economy and troublemakers and Jews and put them into internment camps. And their plan was, if necessary, to exterminate the people that could not be part of the effort. The only reason the coup attempt in 1934 didn't succeed is that they hired the wrong general to lead it, General Smedley Butler, the great Marine hero, two-time Congressional Medal of Honor winner, who worked with the plotters just long enough to be able to identify who they were and then blew the whistle on them to Congress. Incredibly, after being warned by the FBI and the Justice Department and the Treasury Department to cease and desist in their Nazi dealings, they had continued them until 1951. There had been 28 additional seizures of Nazi assets and Nazi business fronts between late 1942 and 1951, and that they had moved Nazi assets into Switzerland, Brazil, Argentina, and Panama, and they had continued to do business with their primary Nazi patron, who was Fritz Thyssen, who backed Hitler beginning in 1921 and who was the wealthiest man in Germany, and a steel and coal baron who, with his partner Friedrich Flick, essentially built the Nazi war machine along with I.G. Farben. In 1951, when Fritz Thyssen died in Argentina, Union Banking Corporation was liquidated by the U.S. government, and Prescott Bush received $1.5 million for his holdings in his Nazi business, and that was the beginning of the Bush family misfortune for all intents and purposes. George Bush doesn't take his philosophical foundation from the Bible or the teachings of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. George Bush takes his inspiration from what he learned in Skull and Bones and from the Thule Society that Hitler and Goebbels and Goring cut their teeth in, Bohemian Grove, these evil organizations that perpetrate the ugly things that these criminals are doing to this country for which they must be held accountable. Now you look at the Republican National Convention this week and you bring in Arnold Schwarzenegger to speak last night. Schwarzenegger is the son of a Nazi. He has praised Nazis. He has praised Hitler. He talked last night in terms like, we will not falter, we will not waver, we will win this war on terror.
He's a leader who doesn't flinch, who doesn't waver, and does not back down.
Well, that's exactly the speeches that Hitler made after the Reichstag fire. Terrorism and the homeland being under attack are precisely the issues that Hitler used to subvert everything within the German system of government. This is a criminal regime. They not only emulate Hitler, but its genesis comes from Hitler. And I defy anyone, a historian, journalist, author, anyone, to come forward and disprove my premise that you cannot differentiate Hitler's invasion of Poland in 1939 and the Reichstag fire and his attempt to dominate the world from George W. Bush's unprovoked invasion of Iraq and subversion of the Constitution through the Patriot Act after 9/11, which I submit is his Reichstag fire.
They want to destroy the currency. They want the dollar to crash so they can create a one world currency that they control. It's just that simple. Now the problem is this. They can't agree on who's going to control everything. They can't agree on what country is going to run what. And also, they don't have every country under their control. Now, the whole thing is most of these leaders of these countries just want peace. They just want to, run their country and live normal. Now, what happens is when they go in there and they try to get the leaders of these countries to join this whole organization, and their leader says, no, I don't want no parts of it, then they scream terrorists. Or they create a reason to go in there and cause a war with that country. We are known for this. America is infamous for that, but that's the reason why they go in there. They say, hey, such and such terrorist did this, and they use the news media to convince the people, to convince the American Congress that, hey, we need to go in there, we need to go into this country and save these people. They're being attacked, such and such. And what they do is once they get in there, they remove that leader and put in place somebody who is already a part of their organization. Now, the reason why Muammar Gaddafi and Saddam was killed was because Gaddafi, he basically wanted to take gold and share it with the people and back his money with gold, back the money by gold. And he wanted to basically change the world reserve currency from the dollar to something better, to gold. Saddam wanted to do the same thing. Saddam wanted to basically take gold and make that the world reserve currency, and they was working towards that. And of course Saddam had oil, so that was like a big thing. Now you gotta understand the dollar is the world reserve currency. Now what that means is major commodities like oil and gold are priced in dollars. So these things are backed by the American dollar. So if the dollar is doing bad, then gold is doing bad. Gold goes down and oil goes down. And if you got a buttload of gold like Gaddafi had gold and Saddam had oil, then of course you want it backed by something that's valuable. Gold stands on its own. Oil stands on its own. So why are they backed by paper? Now people don't understand what's going to happen if the dollar crashes. If you got $100 million in the bank, cash money, it's going to be paper. It's going to be worthless. So if the dollar crashes, everything you have that's money is not worth anything. So all the stores are going to close because we're not going to know what's valuable yet. We're not going to know what's the new currency. So stores are going to close, supermarkets are going to close, and if you ain't got no food, then what are you going to do? It's going to be riots. It's going to be looting. It's going to be robbing and killing. You've seen this whole show, Doomsday Preppers. I mean, that's what they're preparing for. They're preparing for this. Not just them. The government is with these whole FEMA camps.